Everything you said to your babies fell into two broad categories. You all have your own individualistic style of communicating with babies. And this is the world's literature. Everything that you said fell into two broad categories. It was either description or praises. In other words, when you talked to your 4-month-old, you were either describing what was going on in that caregiving routine. You're taking a bath, you're changing your diaper, it's time to eat. You're describing your caregiving routine, or you're praising your baby. You look so cute today. We say that for Italian babies a lot. Okay? You look so cute today. You're dressed so well. That was such a nice smile. So it's descriptions or it's praises. All right. Now, when you measure how mothers use those descriptions or praises, here's what you see across the globe. This is how mothers interact with their babies. They use, catch the number now, 4 to 7 word utterances. This is what you did with your children under 7 months. You spoke in 4 to 7 word utterances with a very even pace, with a very wide inflectional pattern. Now, no one taught you to do that. Just like nature built those things I described into your baby, that's what nature built into you. 4 to 7 words, a wide inflectional pattern, with a very even pace. Who has a baby under a year? Anybody? Anybody? Baby under a year? Your child? You do?
My grandson.
Well, that's as good as anything. Yeah, Dad? Yeah? Tell me how you talk to your child. What do you say? Tell me how you talk to your child. No. Here, listen to what he said now. Listen to how he said it. Say it again. What did you hear? Wide inflectional pattern, up and down. Very even pace. Okay, that's what babies are wired to hear. That's what you were wired to speak. Okay. Now, here's what we want to teach you to do in facilitating a child's communication skills. It's irrelevant the number of words a child has. You will never see me working on vocabulary with a child. I do not teach a child words. Words are almost worthless until the child becomes what we would refer to as a communicative partner. Until the child is a communicative partner, words are irrelevant. Okay? How does that happen? Well, here's the 2 things that I train my students to watch for when they're facilitating a child's communication skills. Just listen to how I word this. Train the caregiver, train yourself as you're working with children, regardless of age, to count, actually count the number and the variety of communicative initiations that a child makes. In other words, how does this child, even as an infant, send a signal to you as the adult that I would like to engage in a communicative exchange? How does a child do that? See, if you're ignoring your 15-month-old, what might he or she do? Or your 2-year-old, what might he or she do? Watch, they might do this. Is that right? Yeah. If you're ignoring that child and he or she wants your attention, they'll do this. Or they'll do this. See? That's their way of initiating an exchange. Now the child who does this or this, is that a socially appropriate way to do it? Is that an acceptable way to do it? I don't know if it is in Turkey, it's not in the United States. Okay, that's not how we initiate conversations. Children need to learn what we call pragmatics, rules for initiating a conversation. So grabbing your face or pulling your pant leg is not acceptable, although kids will do it. Okay? If I were to watch you work with a child under 5, and again, just trust me, I've been doing this for a while, my sense would be you are likely missing multiple initiations that the child is making. You're missing them because you're so focused on words. Words are irrelevant. Until the child learns how to send an initiation signal, some of them are verbal, some of them are nonverbal, but here's the second thing. I would encourage you to count. So you're going to count the number and variety. How does this child send the signal that he would like to engage in a routine? And how frequently does he do it? And then secondly, once you're engaged in that routine, how many turns does he take on the same topic? On the same topic, how many turns will he take? Now, you understand what I mean by turns? If we were going to have a conversation, how are you? I'm fine. Do you have plans tonight? I'm having a quiet evening. I trust you had a good day. Yes, did you see the back and forth? Until children learn that turn-taking routine, you really have nowhere to go with them. And that is why, for many of you, as you work with autistic children, that's where the real struggle comes. Because the primary, I don't want to say it that way, one of the major hurdles with children under 5, autistic children under 5, isn't their vocabulary, it's that they have not become communicative initiators. And that's one of the primary markers for autism early on. They don't send turn-taking signals. And I would tell you, when a child does not send turn-taking signals, you almost have nowhere to go. And thankfully, nature built into children the desire to take turns. Now my experience has been all children, even the most severely autistic children, will send some kind of signal. But they're very fleeting. They're very quick. It may be something as simple as a raised eyebrow. Maybe just simple, a raised eyebrow. And for that child, that may be their sign. I want to engage you. The difficulty with autism is they're not communicative partners. And that's where you have to go very slow. And rather than impose, for an autistic child, rather than impose turn-taking on that child, the first thing I would encourage you to do is to write down as many as you can observe. Have someone else observe with you how this child sends signals. Because until he sends signals, sticking cards under his nose does not make him a communicator. He may be able to point to something you ask him for, that doesn't make him a conversational partner, does it? Okay, so count the number and variety of initiations. And then the second thing to pay attention to, and this is what I train my students to do, actually count the number of turns the child will take. Those two measures are the best barometers of a child's communication skills. Not size of vocabulary. Okay, the number and variety of communicative initiations and the number of turns. Now, what's typical turn taking? How many should we have? We do not have good research on turn taking. The best norms I know of suggest this. For a typically developing child, what is optimal by 30 months of age is 4 to 7 turns. By 30 months of age. 4 to 7 turns. And those turns can be verbal or nonverbal. They don't have to be verbal. Okay? So if he hands you a toy, that's an initiation. Is that right? What is your response if he hands you the toy? Well, what do you do? See, here's the danger. We tend to think as the teacher that we're going to control the treatment session. We're going to dictate the toys. We're going to dictate what we do with those toys and how we're going to interact with those toys. Don't do it that way. You can have a rough idea in mind of what you'd like to accomplish, but you can accomplish that in a variety of different ways if your goal is to count his initiations and count the number of turns that he takes. Okay. Let me share with you an example from my journal. I visited a family one time, a little boy. He was 38 months of age. His name is Stephen. Stephen was born with spina bifida and a number of other developmental risk factors. And I called his mother and I said, I would like to come to your home. I'm going to bring my students. We're going to set up a camera. I have been training her how to do this. And we're going to put up a camera in your living room, and all I want you to do is sit on the floor and play with Stephen. Whatever happens, happens. So here's what she did. She sat with a pile of toys here. She sat in the middle, and Stephen was there. And she grabbed the toy, and she said, what is this? And he named it, car. And she yanked it out of his hand. And she went back and got another thing. What is this? And he said, ball. And she said, good job. And she yanked it out of his hand. She did that 2 or 3 times with several different toys. Now, what was she doing? She was trying to show him off. All the different things Stephen could name. But were they having a conversation? No. No. She did that for several different objects until she reached back and she grabbed a little toy airplane, a little plastic airplane. Now watch my face and listen to the inflectional pattern. What is this, Stephen? And he said, plane? And she yanked it out of his hand and went back and got another toy. As she went back to get the other toy, she realized what she had done. And she said, please stop the tape. I didn't do well, did I? And I said, well, explain to me what you mean you didn't do well. And she said, I was so intent to show him off all the different things he could name that I missed his signal that he would carry on a conversation with the airplane. I said, good job. Now you caught the mistake that you made. She said, start the camera again. And I have probably 7 to 9 minutes of this mother on the floor with Stephen having an incredible conversation. And by that I just mean back and forth, some of it verbal, some of it nonverbal, with a little plastic airplane. That's your goal. That is your goal. Now, I told you norms. 4 to 7 turns. The best norms I know of suggest that you ought to have that by about 30 months of age. Approximately 30 months of age. So in a typically developing child, we want that 4 to 7 months by approximately 2.5 years of age. That doesn't mean you won't get it later than that. But if the child does not have that, I'm going to give you a new word now. He is not what I would call a conversationalist. And if he's not a conversationalist, working on vocabulary is worthless. See, if I was in a conversation with you, how many turns could we take if we had 1 hour? Hundreds. We could talk about school, we could talk about life, we could talk about family, we could talk about work. And as adult conversationalists, we know the appropriate way, and we do this all the time in our conversations, to switch topics. So let's say we're talking about work, and then she switches to the topic of her family. Well, as a conversational partner, when she switches to a conversation about her family, what do? I follow her to talk about her family. And we might have 10 or 12 turns about her family, at which point I might talk about what it's like where I live. What does she do? She follows me to the topic of where I live. If I were to give you a phrase that would describe what that looks like when you're working with a child, it's this. You may have heard this. Follow the child's lead. Follow the child's lead. Don't make him follow your lead by sticking things under his nose and almost forcing him into a conversation regarding that thing. See, what's better for you to do, particularly when you're just starting to work with a child, who's not a conversationalist, what's better for you to do is have 2 or 3 toys, minimal other distractions, sit on the floor, put those toys there, and just watch what he does. Just watch what he does. See, and you're going to look for meaningful patterns of interaction with the toys, purposeful, meaningful play, but the most important thing is the way in which, the number and variety of ways in which he sends you a signal that he would like to interact with you regarding something he chooses. So, follow the child's lead, and another phrase to keep in mind, keep the turn-taking going. Keep it going as long as you can on the same topic. See, if you don't follow his lead, what will that child do? What will he do? If he sends you a signal and you don't follow his lead, what will he do? He'll shut you down. He'll shut you down. It's no different than if we have a conversation. Let's do this. No, stand up. I want them to see your face. I want them to see your face. We'll do it both in English. You'll get the translation. I want you to start a conversation with me. Any topic you choose. Let them all see your face. Don't look at me. Any topic you choose, she's going to start a conversation. Watch what happens.
Okay. Basic things. How much daughters do you have? Or how are your daughters?
When I go home, I'm going to go fishing.
Oh, fishing. Where?
Now, did you see what she did? What was her response? She wanted me to follow her regarding daughters. I changed the topic and didn't follow her lead. What did she do? What did her eyes do? You're going fishing. Wait a minute. You broke a rule. I wanted to keep it shut.
What are you doing after this seminar?
You know, the weather is finally turning nice in Wisconsin. There it is again. What did she do? Thank you. You see what happened? It didn't matter where she wanted to go. I was not going to go with her. Okay? I did that with a woman in a different part of the States, and this is what she did. This is classic. This is classic. What your kids do. This is classic. She stood there, large audience, and she tried 3 times to make me follow her lead. And I wasn't going to go there. After the 3rd time, she stepped back and she did this. Can we stop now? Don't laugh. That's exactly what your kids do. That is, they don't step back and say, can we stop now? They just turn you off. They just turn you off. So I would like you to remember those 2 phrases. Follow the child's lead. Keep the conversation going. And you're going to count, as I suggested, the number and variety of communicative initiations. You're going to count the number of turns that a child takes. Okay, now let me take you back here. Under 4 to 7 months of age, you used, as mothers, a relatively small vocabulary. Early on, prior to 4 to 7 months, your vocabulary is centered on the baby. After 4 to 7 months, this is what nature built into you, your vocabulary shifted to objects or events in the baby's caregiving routine. See, you didn't talk to your 3-month-old saying, it's 4 p.m., Daddy will be home in an hour. You didn't do that with your 3-month-old, did you? You said, you're wet, let's change your diaper. Isn't that what you did? After about 4 to 7 to 9 months of age, the actual content of your interactions with your baby changes to objects and events. At about a year, you're saying to your child, oh, it's 4 p.m. Daddy will be home in an hour. Okay? My point is, watch for that switch in the mothers that you work with. Teach them that babies are early on wired to respond best to praises and descriptions. After they reach and grasp, and their focus shifts to objects, the way in which you talk with them changes. And that's just the way mothers are wired around the world. Please. let's do this.
Teşekkür ederim. I totally agree with you. You are saying 100% right thing.
That's good to know.
Yeah, I hope so. But I am one of the men. I have a son who was diagnosed within a spectrum. I don't care about where was the spectrum, where he was the spectrum. But the question, I'm sure, many of the people and the parents have in mind, what if they don't respond? What if they don't initiate the communication?
No.
What if they don't initiate the anything, any sign-up? So there is a important barrier. The barrier is that till the barrier they start communication, that's fine. After this barrier, but till that point, believe me, it is really, really hard and painful to wait and to observe your children.
I believe
right?
you. I believe you totally.
You don't know what to do, right? And you don't, because whatever you do and how much you wait, he doesn't respond.
I understand.
And even you put one toy or multiple of toys, it doesn't matter.
How old is your child?
Now he is 6.5 years old and he is doing good and he is attending primary school. I am in a safe mode mostly. I am one of the luckiest mom and I wish everyone is gonna get the similar point. But the question I'm sure in mind of the parents here right now, or the answer or the comments or recommendations that they are expecting from you is that what should I do when my son or daughter does not respond? And how they should
I would tell you.
Right? This is what should be managed.
Yeah, that's a very good question.
If you cannot solve the problem, you should manage it.
Yeah.
So the question in my mind of the people, and even me, not maybe for me, but for everyone, I'm sure, because I am part of them, I'm one of them, how should we manage this? Because whatever the input you put, they don't respond. So until some point, maybe you need to put input very in a hard and frequent form, and right after a point, he has a signals or some words, or not words, but the behavior. Right after that point, maybe the mother or father can start.
Yeah. No, I appreciate what you're saying. That's a very good question and very valid points. What's important to understand is your child's communication, not just your child, but the children that you're working with, regardless of what we call them, is much broader than words. All children are communicators. All children. And so for a child who shows no initiations verbally, we have to look for alternate means of communication. And whether it's a communicative device of some type, whether it's gesture, even sign language. I am a proponent of sign language for severely communicatively delayed autistic children. Nature, for the most part, has built into children a desire to communicate. Now, I don't mean to dishearten you, but and you didn't describe this as being your child. If indeed there is a 6-year-old that shows no initiations, verbally, non-verbally, with some kind of a communicative assistive device, sign language or whatever, that child has a very bleak prognosis. Very bleak. Because apart from him being a conversationalist, regardless of the system that you're using, you have nothing to build on.
Let me share one point. Yörünge told us and recommended us that he was described the situation like that. It is like knocking a door, right? Behind the door there is a children.
Yeah.
And we need to, we have to knock the door.
Yeah.
Till when it is open.
Yeah. You knock in different ways.
100%,
Yeah.
but even 10%.
Yeah.
And right after that you can start.
You knock in different ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's exactly right. As I suggested, verbal, gestural, sign language, or some type of assistive device. How many of you are using assistive devices with your autistic children? not many, not available. That's a pretty big area. Computers or other types of assistive device. I have had conversations with 11-year-old autistic children, severely autistic children, legitimate turn-taking who never spoke a word, but they're able to type out or with sign on the computer carry on a conversation. So, but if you have a child in that age range that shows no initiation, and no matter how widely you knock or how loudly you knock, there's no response, that's a very bleak situation for that child. That's a very difficult situation. And those are things you're probably, and I don't like to say this any more than you're going to like to hear it, those are probably kids who are going to make little to no communicative progress over time. That doesn't mean they're not making sense of their world, okay? But it does mean they'll never be productive, may never be productive interactors with their world. There are some children that we work with, I don't like to say this, you don't like to hear it, for which there's no fix. Yes, there are some children that we work with for which there's no fix. Do we give up? I'm not suggesting that, because I'm not wired that way. But if that child was in my caseload, I would sit down and suggest something like this to Mother. Mother, I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. That this is not going away. This is a long-term, significant developmental pathology delay. We will keep knocking, and we'll take what we can get. That's the real world. There are some children for whom there's no fix. Thankfully, that's the smaller percentage, but there will be some patterns even for that child of appropriate patterns of making sense of the world. Someone had a hand. Please, let me get the mic. What do I do with it? It's over there.
I want to ask a question from the other side of the spectrum. For kids who are more treatable and who can lessen the gap within a short period of time. As a parent, I want to ask that my child is said to have finished the gap and is supposed to be at the level where he should be. When am I supposed to feel free? Because I've talked to other parents who said, well, my son was also in the positive side, but suddenly something turned different. Until the age 3, until the age 4, is there a point where a mother can have a deep night?
The answer to that is no. It's the simplest answer I can give you. Let me see parents of children with special needs here. Let me see your hands. Let me see you, please. Put your hands up. You are the only constant in your child's life. Doctors will change, schools will change, therapists will change, everything will change over time except you. And so if you're looking for that time when you are free, it probably will never happen. But don't equate free from a lack of catching up. You're always going to be concerned about how your child is developed. And because you put so much emotion and effort into him early, you have created a mindset. It's not bad, it's real, that I'm always going to be vigilant to other areas of delay. You'll never be free. That's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing at all. Okay, let me finish taking you through this. Now, I want to take you down here for the sake of time. I want to give you a phase-by-phase, I want to take you here. I want to give you some basic principles to keep in mind when facilitating a child's communication skills. And I want you to pay attention to the first one. Monitor your talking. See, what I mean by that is that you talk so much during a treatment session that even if the child could initiate, you never give them a chance because you're talking nonstop. There's nothing wrong with periods of silence during a treatment session as long as both you and the child are directing your attention to the same thing. There's nothing wrong with periods of silence. So if I were to observe you working with a child, you know what I would probably say to some of you? Too much talking. You're not giving him a chance to send a signal or to respond in a turn-taking manner. That is particularly true for the child you described. The child that's moderately to severely autistic, we are so intent on wanting to have a communicative interaction with them that we talk non-stop. non-stop. So monitor your talking. Use actions, not pictures. I am not a proponent. There's a place for pictures, but I'm not a proponent of putting pictures under a child on the table and saying point to this or point to that. I can teach a parrot to do that. That doesn't make that parrot a communicative partner, does it? There's a place for pictures, but not as the primary way of interacting with the child. Avoid yes-no questions. If you ask a child a yes-no question, see, here's what happens. Remember what the goal is now? Turns, turns, turns. If you ask a child a yes-no question, and even if he gives you the right answer, yes, is that a conversation? No. So then what do you wind up doing? You wind up asking him another what? Yes-no question. Try to, and you can help one another with this, try to come up with a group of conversational initiators with children that you work with that are not yes-no questions. Do your best. We're so geared as adults when we talk with children to ask yes-no type questions. Emphasize function or intent rather than structure. When a child is first becoming, regardless of what we call that child, when a child is first becoming a conversationalist, he may make multiple articulation and or grammatical errors. Do not worry about that. You see, before he is a conversationalist, there's no grammar or articulation to fix. Okay, I can go back and work on some grammar things and some articulation things. So focus on function as opposed to structure. Okay. Now I want to show you a phase-by-phase approach. There's sensorily, nothing is available to him meaningfully. Okay, I could tell you some stories about children that were on that had serious sensory integration deficits, and we have called those kids all kinds of things. And the simple matter is they were so overloaded sensorily that they could not focus in a meaningful manner on anything. Now, thankfully, these phases are biologically driven. A child with a significant neurologic deficit early, some kind of brain anomaly, or a child with a chromosomal metabolic genetic disorder that has a significant component to developmental disability that goes along with it, sometimes this can be hard to find. Okay, that's phase one. Now phase two is what we call reciprocal actions. This is what you're looking for, okay? You want to establish what I've been speaking of, that joint attention, both you and the child paying attention to the same thing at the same time. Early on it's faces, later on it's objects of the child's choosing. I'm curious, when you provide services for children in your different settings, how many of you ask the parents to bring the child's toys? It's not a bad idea. You see, because you're sticking strange toys under the child's nose. You're giving that child toys that he has not learned or been exposed to. And I'm not saying you should consider that every time. It is wise to ask the family to bring one or two of the child's favorite toys. You will get a better pattern of interaction if the child is interacting with familiar things as opposed to unfamiliar things. Looking for that response pattern that we described and expand the child's repertoire, looking for those social ritualistic games. Let me share with you an observation that I made a number of years ago. If I were to ask you mothers, think back to when your children were under 3. Some of you had maybe 1, 2, 3 kids at the same time, under 3 or under 4. If I were to ask you what the most stressful times of your day was as you cared for your preschoolers, what would you say those times were? Let's say you have 2 children under 4 or under 5. What were your most stressful, taxing times of your day? What was it? Mealtime? Bedtime? Bath time? Changing time? Some of you might say all the time. I don't know. Now think, because you are good mothers, as part of your caregiving routine during those stressful times, you made up, or your culture has provided for you, verbally ritualistic games you played. Did you play games with your daughter when you gave her a bath at 2? Did you play games when you fed your 3-year-old son? Did you have little games that you played when you dressed your 15-month-old? Yes, you did. Now, no one gave you a book saying these are games you should play. You just, because you are good mothers, you made those games up. And they're highly verbal. And they're very ritualistic. And they reflect what's going on. Now, here's the stunning observation I made, and I was late in getting this. About 90% of families of children with special needs never make up those mutually pleasurable, verbally ritualistic games. They never make them up. Why? What's pleasurable about feeding a child where at least twice a week she gets aspiration pneumonia and it takes you an hour to feed her? That's not pleasurable. Okay, that's terrifying. What's pleasurable about giving your 2.5-year-old a bath when as soon as her heel touches the water, she gets very stiff and screams for the next 50 minutes? What's pleasurable about that? Okay? So what I would encourage you to do is ask your parents what kinds of games they've learned to play as part of their typical caregiving routine. And if they don't have any, help them find some. Help them make some games up. That goes a long way in facilitating the child's communication skills. Phase 3 is social communicative signals. By the time you get to this phase, this child is more verbal. And I haven't attached ages to this. This is where you're looking for and rewarding those vocalic, motoric, and gestural actions. And the contingencies, the reciprocal part that takes place. And you want to look for and reward any vocal or gestural attempts to communicate. Phase 4, early comprehension. This is when the child's understanding what you're saying. I watched this a lot this morning where I visited. Okay, I watched a number of children demonstrate good comprehension. They weren't always there, they're there now, which speaks well of the family, the clinic, and the parents. Okay, and the teachers. You want to expand that comprehension repertoire using both play-based and formal approach, and which then leads us to phase 5. This is early production. This is where we enhance all vocalizations. We're rewarding the child repeatedly for his or her vocalizations. You're looking at the intelligibility, how clearly the child speaks. You want to link activities and objects with words. When you get to this point, this child is a conversationalist. He's a full partner. His vocabulary may not be huge. You may not understand 100% of what he says clarity-wise, but he's a conversational partner. This is where you're headed. And for some of your children, it'll take you 3 years to get there. Maybe more to get there. Now, remember, do you recall those 2 phrases? Follow the child's lead. Keep the conversation going. Verbal, nonverbal, any system you can use to achieve those goals will move you along from phase 1 to phase 2 to 3, 4, and to 5. Okay? Now, I'm going to switch gears very, very quickly here. I want to watch our time. Yeah, can we boot up the one that says parents, please? I want to spend the next 30 minutes, which is all we have, talking specifically about some family issues. And we're going to go to a chart. Thank you. It was quicker than I would have done it. I want you to see a chart that I developed about 15 years ago that is exceedingly, I want to take you here first. In one of the books we did, for one of the chapters, I interviewed several hundred women over the course of 3 years. And I asked them, tell me the emotional steps, stages you went through when you became fully attached to your baby. What was it that equipped you to be attached to your baby? You might like the word bonding. I use the word attachment. Same thing. Okay? This is what they told us. Okay? And you're going to find this to be very interesting. First of all, they said, well, part of my accepting the pregnancy was I planned it. Now, that doesn't happen for everybody. Some of you have children and you think, that wasn't planned. They're the joy of your life, but you had a surprise. Is that right? But confirming the pregnancy. How did you confirm you were pregnant? In this country, how do you do that? You have early pregnancy tests that you take home. Okay, you have EPTs, early pregnancy tests, yeah. But I have 4 daughters. The youngest is 27, okay, 26. In that era, okay, this is how it worked. Well, let me tell you my response at delivering all these daughters, okay. Actually, we've had 5 daughters. Our firstborn died as an infant. She was a full-term baby born with a very severe heart defect, complete transposition of her heart. In that era, even if you knew it was coming, she would not have survived. Some of those babies survived today. So each time the baby was born, the doctor said, it's a girl. And I thought, yes, it's a girl. And then you deal with the pain and the trauma of losing a baby. And then when we delivered the second daughter, the doctor said, it's a girl. And I thought, yes. And then when it came to delivering the third baby, the doctor said, it's a girl. And I said, okay. Then when it came to delivering the fourth baby, the doctor said, it's a girl. And I said, oh, it's a girl. And then when it came to the fifth one, and he said, it's a girl, I said, oh my goodness, it's a girl. It's a girl. All 4 of them are married, so the odds now in my home are even. I have 4 granddaughters, so they'll never be even. At some point in time, you accepted the pregnancy. You came to say, okay, I'm pregnant. And now women will tell you the world over that there's an event that solidifies their acceptance of the pregnancy, and that's the first time they felt movement. Prior to that, you thought, I'm pregnant. But after you feel movement, that's when you begin to fantasize. I want a boy, I want a girl, I want tall, I want short, I want a football player, I want a ballerina. You naturally began to fantasize, okay? But I want you to see numbers 6, 7, 8, and 9. This is very significant as it relates to engaging caregivers in the process. Now I'm going to ask you, we have known one another now for 2 hours, which means we're old friends. Okay? Mothers, there are a number of mothers here. I'm going to ask you 2 questions. If you raise your hand for the first question, keep it up until I ask you the second question. Would you do that? Very honest now. How many of you mothers, during the course of your pregnancy, spent any amount of time, even for a fleeting moment, worried about what could go wrong? Let me see your hands. How many of you? How many of you? You're being honest now, see? All right, now watch what's going to happen. Look around the room. These are the mothers who said they felt worried. How many of you got stuck there? In other words, for how many of you was it a lingering, pervasive, just wouldn't quite go away? It just lingers there. Thank you for your honesty. I appreciate that. Here's what happens. 100% of women around the globe will tell you, I had some even slight lingering concern about what could go wrong. Okay, so that's virtually universal.